Okay, Becky will make announcements towards the end. So my name is Ingrid Dixon. I think most of you guys know me. We're going to talk today about overcoming resistance to baby-friendly from your staff, which staff could mean any number of people. Trying to work it. Okay, so the question that most people have for us is, how do they do it? Whenever somebody gets designated, they always say, what did they do? What are they doing right? And there are some people that whenever they started this journey, there are other hospitals that are on the journey that they think, oh, they're going to rock it straight ahead and they're going to finish really quickly. And then what happens is there's somebody else who, flies forward, and the person who you thought was going to finish quickly is still working on things. So we get that question from any number of people, not just people who are just starting this. What are you looking for? Okay. Sorry, Becky's kind of flittering around me here, kind of distracted me a little bit. Okay.
I'll be quiet.
So anyway, so the big thing is, what most people ask us is, how do we overcome resistance? They either have resistance from physicians, from staff nurses, from their administration, from all sorts of different places. But if we look at it, most people say, oh, well, it's this department's not on board. Like, let's say, pediatrics isn't on board, but everybody else is on board. Well, really, you may find you have some champions within each group, but it may be that they are not the loudest or the ones that are there the most often. I find some people say they have OBs that are really supportive, but they only deliver like 4 babies in that facility a month. Well, that's good, but they're not there to influence a lot of things. But most of the time, you get one person who's resistant for whatever reason, and they sort of spread their resistance around to others, I guess, or they're the loudest and nobody else really speaks up. So anytime we have any sort of change happen, there are four typical reactions according to psychologists. There's active acceptance, which you say something and they say, oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And then there's somebody who passively says, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And then passive resistance says, yeah, I'm not going to do that. You can if you want to, but I'm not. And then the active resistant person is somebody who says, yeah, I'm not doing that, and there's no way you're going to make me do that. And we get that sometimes from, I find that the most commonly that's reported from physicians that say, I'm absolutely not going to do that. We look at why is that? Why are some people so ingrained in, I'm absolutely not going to make any sort of change? And a lot of it comes down to what's called soldier mentality, or what we refer to as motivated reasoning. So what this is these are people that have staked their claim on whatever idea, and they're absolutely not going to change. And sometimes what happens with this is you'll have somebody who will assert their opinion publicly and very loudly, and then even when you try and discuss things with them and help them to see a new way of thinking, they don't feel like they can change their position because publicly they've already stated one thing. That happens a lot of times in Facebook arguments. Anyway, anyone who's ever kind of gone down that rabbit hole of thinking that something's going to actually happen there, I've been victim of that myself a few times. Anyway, but it's that what happens in soldier mentality is that we all have to band together as a group, and this is what we're doing. And you hold pretty fast to those ideologies. And sometimes what happens is you get a new person in and you recruit them to that ideology, and they don't really even know why they do that. It's that, well, that's just the way we've always done things. And so there was an interesting video that I saw recently that was talking about, it was on like one of those like Dateline or something, when it was talking about group psychology, and there was a woman sitting in a waiting room. She walks into a waiting room of a doctor's office, and every 30 or 60 seconds they would make something beep. And whenever it beeped, every single person in the waiting room would stand up. And so the woman who just walked in, looked around like, why are all these people standing up? And then they would sit back down, and it would beep again, and within 5 or 6 of the beeps, she started standing up too with the whole group, even though she didn't know why. And then what happened was to again assess the psychology of group mentality or soldier mentality, is that then they took the people away who had been in the waiting room with her. So one by one they called them back to the doctor's office, and then they sent in new people to the waiting room, and she continued to stand up with the beeps, even though she didn't know why. And then what happened is she recruited other people in the room to stand up with her. One guy even said, "Why are you standing up?" And she said, "I don't know. That's what everybody was doing, but whenever I got here." So then they kept doing the beeps, and the guy who asked her, "Why are you doing that?" he started standing up too. And it's all part of this herd mentality. So that's why a lot of times you get a new nurse that comes in and says, well, I'm going to draw my labs at the bedside, and somebody else says, "Oh, no, we take the baby to the nursery for that." And the new nurse may say, "Why?" And it's, "Well, that's what we do." And so, as we all know in healthcare, some of the scariest words are, "This is how we've always done it." And nobody wants to hear that anyway, but a lot of times that's a great question, actually, as far as why are we doing it this way. It means that you're actually challenging what is our reasoning behind this. And the reasoning behind a lot of people using a nursery was back whenever they used to kind of give moms lots and lots of sedatives and use forceps and kind of really remove the baby from the mom. Yeah, she's absolutely not in a place to take care of her child. But anesthesia is not what it was whenever that was enacted. Things are not the same as they were, and if we don't change the way that we're doing things, then we're doing stuff for no reason. We're standing up in a waiting room when the light is beeping or when the noise is beeping. We don't even really know why. So what we want to encourage in people is what's called scout mindset. So scouts, whenever you're in the military, what they do is they are not there to push forward any sort of agenda. What a scout does is a scout is the forward person. They intentionally disguise themselves, usually in a ghillie suit or something where they blend in with their surroundings, and all they are is information reconnaissance. All they are is to go and look forward and say, what is the current state of things? What is going on? And then you come back and the scout reports back to you, here's where we find ourselves. This is what's going on. And they're not interested in any specific agenda. And what happens is they may have some preconceived notions on, whenever I get to the top of this hill, I'm going to see a bunch of Taliban people down there, constructing a bomb or something. But if that doesn't happen, that doesn't make them stupid. It's just, oh, that's not what I expected. But they're just asking for information, and then when they ask for more information, then they can really assess the situation and decide how to attack it appropriately. But if you're back in soldier mindset, it's just, we're just going to push forward with our might and make it happen, which usually what happens in war or any type of a battle is that one side is either decimated by the other, or one side gets so obliterated that finally the leaders sit down and have a meeting and say, okay, how do we fix this? Ideally, we don't want to go into war. We don't want to have anyone obliterated. We want to just get to the point where we sit down and kind of talk things out rationally. So, how? How do you do this? The best thing is for those people that are in a place of change or that are the catalysts that are bringing about bringing baby-friendly to their hospital is to be good role models for this. And I know we're all works in progress, or at least I hope we think so, because I know I'm not perfect at this, but oftentimes I find whenever I step back and look at, okay, how should I really be assessing the situation, that's good. And I've seen other people that when I've been in some tense situations, I've had students with me. I had one person who, it was pretty tense with a patient, and whenever I just kind of took a moment and walked myself through and then talked to the patient about all the reasons why that was probably not what we wanted to do. Then after she left, she said, wow, that was masterful. And I was just like, okay, that feels very nice to have someone tell you that, but it also took a lot of conscious thought on my part to not say, no, don't do that, because that's what you often want to say. But nobody usually, again, looking at like a Facebook argument or something like that, nobody usually has their mind changed by somebody yelling and screaming at them. It's usually once you kind of get into what their underlying motivation is. So in my life, I've had a lot of experience with working on different ways of communicating. There are things for business. There are things for parenting. In lactation, we use 3-step counseling, and what you kind of find are the same themes. And what was interesting is I actually read this book on hostage negotiation before I ever had children. And then I read this book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, and I was like, man, I know I've heard this before somewhere. And it was in hostage negotiation. And it's because you use the same techniques. And so, and when we look at FBI, now whether you agree with their, I mean, they don't win everyone, but when you look at their, when you look at what they do, FBI negotiators have really, really, really high success rates. And whenever we look at what they do and whenever things work, they followed the recipe perfectly. Whenever things go south, it's that the negotiator went off script. The negotiator did not follow the steps. So these are the steps as far as their behavioral change stairway. And I know in nursing or in lots of healthcare, there are lots of different models for behavioral change, but whenever I look at hostage negotiators, they're talking to people and getting them to do stuff that they absolutely do not want to do. That was not their plan when they showed up. And they took hostages and have a gun or a bomb or whatever, and they absolutely do not want to do what the FBI negotiator wants them to do. But a lot of times they make it happen, or they get them to release people, or they get them to concede some things. But that doesn't happen right away. So they have to start with active listening. The first thing is always, okay, what are your demands? And then, okay, well, how, tell me why you want that. I want $1 million in a helicopter on the roof in an hour. Well, okay, where's the helicopter going to take you? Because I've got to pull, things for flight plans and stuff. I can't just let a helicopter go off in the air. And then you start to really listen to what's going on with that person. It works well, but most of us don't follow this plan. Where most of us get it wrong is we don't start with active listening, because most people are terrible at listening. Okay, most people, whenever they hear you formulating or saying something, they're formulating a response in their head, and they're not truly listening to what you have to say. They hear a few key points, and then they're developing, here's what I'm going to respond and say, you're wrong here, here, and here. And so you get this sort of, I'm for this and you're for that, and then you sort of butt heads. And everybody's very pro and con, or pro or anti argument. So most of us are skipping the first 3 steps when it comes to baby-friendly hospital initiative, as we start at step 4, which is the influence. I'm your supervisor. I'm the director of women's services. I'm in charge of lactation. I'm doing whatever. I got the CEO to sign on, so here's what's going to happen. And when people say, whoa, I don't want to do that, then you say, well, the CEO's on board, everybody else on board, so you all just better get in line. And then what happens is people will say, here's why this is right, here's why baby-friendly needs to happen, and here's why I'm right and why you're wrong. And that doesn't work very often, because if people were fundamentally rational, that would work. You would explain, you would lay out a really logical argument for them, and they would go, oh, look at that, I was really just had my head in the clouds. I don't know what I was thinking there. But people don't do that, because decisions are not just made on logic. They're made on emotion. They're made on life experience. A lot of people start off, every single person starts off with their cultural experience. Whatever you grew up with, that's what you experience. So the way you raise a baby, the way you feed a baby, should you let the baby cry, should you pick it up, should you do this? Then there's also what I did with my kids, the experience that I had. And if you go to nursing school or you go to medical school or you go to some other sort of training, some of those things that you think are correct are taken out of you. Okay, so like an example I like to use is that I was 25 years old, so really old enough to know better. I was taking a nutrition class in preparation to go to nursing school, and they were talking about a mechanically soft diet and that you would cut the crust off of a bread. And I, thinking I'm super smart, raise my hand and say, well, but that's where all the vitamins and minerals are. Why would you cut those off? And the instructor looked at me and he actually chuckled and he said, who told you that? And I said, my mom? And he was like, that's not true. And then he went in and said, he goes, so all of the dough is homogeneous and the same, and then somehow you put it in the oven and poof, all the vitamins and minerals go to the crust? And I sat there in that class and just thought, God, I am really dumb. And so I guess I was 25, old enough that I really should have thought better of that. So, being embarrassed, I called my mom up whenever I got to class, and I said, why did you tell me that? Because you mean that's not true? And
And I said, no, it's not true. And I said, who told you that? And she said, well, my mom told me. And my mom was a college professor here at OU for 28 years. She's a very intelligent woman. But the thing is that she never had the reason to question that thought. Nobody ever brought it to her in a way that made her think, oh, the things I assume are true are not true. And so a lot of times that's what happens when we're taking care of children, is that we think, somebody says, oh, don't pick them up, you're going to spoil them. Oh, you better swaddle that baby or they'll never sleep, or don't, feed them all the time. They're using you as a pacifier, or that baby's manipulating you. None of that's really rooted in psychological or physiological fact. But most of us are still rooted there. So we look at the way that we're taking care of babies, the way that our babies were taken care of. And so if you look at bedside nurses, the way they're taking care of moms, those mamas tell them, you're doing a great job for me. I love you. Thank you so much for being my nurse. I wouldn't have survived these few days without it. You go in and you say, hey, the stuff you've been doing, the stuff that your patients praise you for, yeah, we're going to stop doing that. And most of them say, whoa, I don't want to do that. So then they kind of dig their heels in. But if we explain, because like in 1994, when they changed the recommendation from putting babies on their stomach so they didn't aspirate vomit to putting them on their back, there was some pushback. But then what happened was you get all the evidence in line and say, listen, this reduces SIDS by a large margin. Everybody got on board and was singing the same tune pretty quickly. Now, that's a simple thing of just flipping the baby from their front to their back. It's not nearly as involved as baby friendly is, but it still is the same thing, is that you have to give them the evidence and the rationale behind the change of behavior, not just you're going to do this and here's why. So the 5 steps for the hostage negotiation technique, the first step is active listening. So you want to be actively listening whenever the person is talking to you. The important thing is to hear what they're saying to you. So hear the biography, not the ideology. So I heard about this program is called Sidewalk Talk, and I heard about this, that these people were outside of the Republican National Convention in Cleveland last month, and there was a guy out there with a booth that just said free listening. And the lady walked up and was like, what's the point of this? Why are you sitting here? And he said, I'm just here to listen. Most people want to say what they want to say, but they don't ever really feel like they're heard. And she said, so you just want to hear what I have to say? And he said, yep, indeed. So she said, well, I think, and this guy, he's a reporter. He said he's been pro-choice his entire life. She said, well, I think that people that have abortions should be put in jail for murder. I think that people use it as birth control. They shouldn't be using it as birth control. And instead of taking the appropriate actions to make sure they don't get pregnant, using it as birth control, and instead they're just murdering someone. And I don't think that they should be able to just walk around free. I certainly don't think it should be legal. And instead of making any sort of judgment, the man said, tell me how you came to that decision. Why do you think that way? And he said the woman seemed a little flustered and kind of looked back thinking, what? What do you mean? And then she said, well, my husband and I have been married for 12 years, and we've wanted to have children for a really long time, and we've struggled, and I've had 5 miscarriages, and having kids is probably not going to happen for me. And then I see these people who get pregnant so easily, and they just throw it all away. And then she began to cry. And the man just said, I appreciate you sharing your story with me. And that was the end of that interaction. But the thing that was important there is that he already said he didn't agree with her. He was pro-choice, not pro-life. But that wasn't what was important. What mattered was he was just there to hear what she had to say. So that's the important thing when we're thinking about starting a baby-friendly, or we're working on this and we've got people who are pushing back. Don't immediately discount what they're asking you to do. Ask them why. What are their concerns? So the next thing is empathy. Once you come to a place where you understand, so you've actively listened to the person, you understand where they're coming from, then you can certainly understand how they got there. Not that you agree with them, but you understand how that person feels that way. So most of us, whenever we have a situation, we understand what's going on, we don't get to the empathy part. We get to where I want to change your behavior. I want to still skip ahead to step 4. So this is my daughter, and we were trying to have professional pictures made, and they were late, and we'd missed lunch, and now we were blurring into nap time, and what happened for her is she didn't want to have her picture made. She was not having it. But it was important to me. This is a picture that, or a dress that my mother had her picture taken in when she was this age. I had my picture taken in this dress when I was my daughter's age, and then my daughter. So it was really important that I get this picture made. And so my first inclination was, oh my gosh, you're ruining it. I got to get this picture, and instead you're screaming and crying. You're not going to have this sweet little picture like I want it to be. That was my first instinct was, oh no, you're screwing it up. And I was mad at her. I was mad at the photographer for being late. I was mad at all this stuff, but that doesn't help anyone. And so I took a minute, took a deep breath, and looked at her and I said, it feels scary to stand there by yourself, doesn't it? And then I said, you don't want to do this anymore. And so then all I had to do was listen or reflect her feelings back to her and verbalize saying, I hear you. I hear what you're feeling and understand truly I see where you're coming from. Then what happened was, so we started to kind of talk her down off the cliff. This is her again kind of, oh yeah, it is scary to stand here. And so the thing is empathy is what you feel when you finally say, oh, I see where you are. Rapport is when they feel it back, when they start to say, you get me, I like you, I really identify with you. And it's that you tell them things that they already know, tell them things that they already feel, but the fact that you're verbalizing that back to them helps them to say, okay, you get me. Then we get to the point of influence, which is, okay, I understand you, I've heard your concerns, we have an understanding here. Now, this is where I want to be, this is where you are, let's put our heads together and problem solve this out and figure out how do we make this go from A to B. I understand you feel concerned about drawing labs in the room, and sometimes you may have to, if somebody is raising a concern, you may have to verbalize things that they state to you that they may not admit, because some people don't know how to articulate things exactly. So it may be, you might be concerned about drawing the labs in the room for fear that the parents are judging you, or they're concerned that you're hurting their child while you're drawing the labs. But how can we walk that through so that we can have the labs drawn in the room, take care of your fears, and also make sure the parents know what's going on? Well, let's walk through and say, okay, I'm going to put this little heel warmer on the baby here. We're going to wrap it there, leave it for a few minutes so that the blood flows easily. Okay, got to have a little stick here, and walk them through. And it feels scary at first. Everything feels scary. You know, I remember the first time I ever stuck a needle in somebody's arm, I was scared to death, because I didn't want to hurt him. But once you get practice and you get somebody there reassuring you, that can be helpful. So influence is, I hear your objection, and here's where we need to be. How do we get there? The second thing is behavioral change. So ideally what we wound up doing with my daughter was I gave her a toy, and then she wanted to sit with her brothers. So that wasn't the picture I had in my mind. I wanted a picture of her by herself without some cheap little toy in her hand in this dress. But the thing is I didn't have to have it my way. What I have is I have a picture of her smiling in the dress. That was the end goal. And so that's where also we can be flexible as well in the fact that we may see it going one way, but if it's something that's sort of similar but not exactly as we envisioned it, that doesn't necessarily make it wrong. If people are doing labs in the room, but they're turning their back and not talking to the patient about it, but the patient doesn't seem to care, okay, all right, that's great. That's not exactly how we would want things to go. We'd want them to walk through it, but they're doing labs in the room. We're keeping moms and babies together, and moms are in a position to advocate for their babies if they're needed. So there are some other strategies to change someone's mind. And so this is what I was talking about, is that initially you guys need to conduct an interview with people that, and I wouldn't single them out. I would have a meeting. Some of them should be your allies, and some of them should be the people who are opposing you, either actively or passively, and kind of say, okay, we've been doing this for a little while. What do you guys think is working? What is not working? And so kind of, okay, this is, and make it everybody's idea. We all want baby-friendly. I know that we do, but we're having some challenges with it. What can we do going forward? Where are we struggling? And then also admit that there are certain holes or things that you don't know how to address. That's where I've heard people so many times that they don't know how to answer something, so they make up an answer. And it's okay to say, I don't know the answer to that, or, that is an interesting question. We get questions a lot from hospitals that are saying, we've had this brought up a couple of times and we don't know how to address it. And usually, Becky or I have heard it before, and we have a whole list of things, of common questions of these are all the things we've heard, and these are some suggestions that people had. And sometimes we get one that's a head scratcher that we have to say, well, okay, we're going to have to look into that a little bit more. And that's okay. And if people say, okay, I know that this looks daunting, but and I'm not sure how we're going to do it all, but let's just take it a piece at a time. So there was a research study done about staff resistance to the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative. And so what they did is they came up with some interview questions. The first thing was, describe your responsibilities. What's your job? What's your role in relation to Baby-Friendly? And then why do you think that Baby-Friendly was selected? And then what are the barriers and some other things? They got some really interesting responses. Most people, whenever they responded, most of the staff members when responded thought that Baby-Friendly was a marketing tool. Thought that it was some sort of designation that made us super extra awesome, but it didn't really change much. Very few, in fact, 0 people cited it as a safety or a quality improvement measure. So that was pretty interesting, because that's what, when you look at most people who are really involved with Baby-Friendly, is they either cite quality improvement, safety, or both. And so if somebody thinks that, oh, you're making me do this because it's just marketing, well, most people don't want to be involved with that. Most people want to give good quality care, not be a part of a marketing machine. Okay, so there are some, they also found there were common people that were facilitators for Baby-Friendly and common things or people that were barriers. So facilitators were the skills of the staff, which is part of the staff training part. You've got to get management on board and you've got to get staff on board. Those were all facilitators. When the hospitals that we have that are struggling, it's that it may be that someone in lactation or someone in women's leadership is on board, but when it goes higher up, that doesn't really happen. Or sometimes it may be the CEO says, hey, are we baby-friendly? Okay, well, we need to do that. And then they just sort of make this edict and pass it down and say, make it happen. And nobody else is really on board with that. They're like, I don't want to do that. So it becomes a challenge. And most of the things that people cite as barriers are lack of time, old patterns, and personal experiences. Those were the top 3, which we've already talked about. And a lot of people think that physicians, their most common thing is, I don't have time, like prenatal education, I don't have time to talk to them about that. Our visits are already jam-packed. I don't have time to add one more thing. So that's where those breastfeeding task force have to come in and say, okay, how do we make this happen in a way that's really workable? So where do you start? Because a lot of times people just think, this feels so overwhelming, I just want to go bang my head against a wall, I don't really know what to do. So the first thing is, so before you ever get started would be tell your staff that we're going to work on Baby-Friendly. You guys most of you are either already started or at least interested. Then have a meeting. So tell the staff, hey, we're having a meeting next week and we're going to discuss the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative and how we're going to implement that in our hospital. So I want you guys to be thinking on that, bring some things to discuss, pros, cons, concerns, whatever. And then, so have that meeting. That meeting needs to be an active listening session where everybody's talking and just saying, okay, here's what I think is going to be good about this, here's what I think is going to be challenging, and these are the things that I think are concerning. Like a lot of people say, well, if we don't give them a formula gift bag, what are we going to give them? Because it winds up being, but those are easy things to address that we know that they don't really miss it. But a lot of things that people think are going to be big issues wind up not being that challenging. But if those needs are never addressed, then that leads to a lot of staff dissatisfaction. Because what they say why most people are dissatisfied is they don't feel heard and they don't feel incorporated into decision making.
that becomes problematic. So this is going to happen, but if you phrase it where, everybody wants good quality care for moms and babies, that's not debatable among staff nurses. They want to do the best for their patients. What the best looks like to them is where a lot of times we get into the weeds as far as, well, I think it should be this and you think it should be that. So once you have all of the concerns from everybody who's going to be involved, then the baby-friendly task force needs to have a meeting, and you need to come up with strategies to address their concerns, to fill in those gaps, and then report those back to your staff. A lot of people find that they voice a concern and it never gets followed up on, or they don't feel like they get a really satisfactory answer. And so, again, like the guy with the lady at the rally who was about the abortion, he didn't have to agree with her. He just needed to let her know she was heard. And so if somebody comes back and says, well, but what about getting rid of pacifiers? It's going to be a huge problem. And just say, I know you're concerned about that. We're still working on how we're going to address that. If you think of anything in the meantime, let me know. But do it in a way that's not dismissive. Because a lot of times people say, oh, yeah, we're working on that. I'll let you know what we come up with. And then 2 years later, they still hear nothing. I would encourage you guys to have some sort of a bulletin or something in your break room that kind of has updates on, hey, here's where we are on baby friendly, these are the steps, these are the things we've implemented, and this is what our plan is for the following things going forward. So a lot of times what happens is people will have these meetings, they assess things, and they just think, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. I'm not even sure how we're going to do this. And they get bogged down in I wish this was different, I wish this was changed, I wish this person didn't work here, God, why doesn't that person just retire? Why did this person volunteer to do this? And the thing is that all of that stuff is part of the process, but I would encourage you not to get stuck there. Because a lot of times what happens is we find ourselves in situations that are really unpleasant. And you can sit there and kind of say, gosh, I wish I wasn't here, and worried about this shouldn't have happened, and I shouldn't be here, and this should happen. But if you get stuck there, that's not really a place of being productive. So this is where you find yourself. I say that to myself all the time. Don't get upset. This is where you find yourself. This is the task in front of you, whether you want it to be or not. And a lot of times people will say, gosh, I feel overwhelmed. Like, how do I eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time. Don't worry about eating the whole thing. Just keep taking a bite. So keep working on the things in baby friendly that you can be working on, and then later you'll address the parts that are bigger, that are more of a challenge. So what a lot of people start off with is they don't change everything at once. That's part of what makes it so daunting, is that they decide, okay, we've got these 10 steps and we have to change all of them at once. So what happened is in Colorado, they had several hospitals that started off on the baby-friendly journey, and they were getting stuck, because they couldn't achieve all 10 steps in the timeline they'd laid out for themselves. So then Colorado came up with what they called the Can-Do 5, which was, well, I don't know if we can do all 10 right away, but we can do 5. They're pretty easy. So the first one is the infant is breastfed within the first hour after birth. I can make that happen. And then the infant is fed only breast milk in the hospital, can make that happen too, and that doesn't include medical indication. This is just healthy term babies. Infant stays in the room with the mom, infant doesn't use a pacifier, and the hospital gives mom a telephone number to call after discharge. That's easy. For every single one of you guys, really it's 4 steps. Because you breastfeeding hotline, boom, knock that out. That's handled for you. So if you start with these things, or if you look at yourself and say, these are the things that we're doing, and really praise your staff for that, and say, we're really doing well, and say, okay, but we still have, and then take on one thing at a time. This month we're going to work on pacifier use, because we really want to get there. What can we do? Because if we have, there was a hospital that was, they had no pacifiers, but anytime I would walk into a room whenever we were doing a survey, there was a pacifier, and it was, oh yeah, they said that they don't give them anymore, but we just go down to the gift shop and get one. Like, every baby had a pacifier from the gift shop. So there's something challenging there. So it's, yeah, we got rid of pacifiers, but now we're saying, yeah, we don't buy them anymore, so just go downstairs. Well, so we can work on that. That's an easier fix. So start slowly,
boil the frog. I'm assuming most people know that analogy where you start them off in slow water and they think they're in a sauna and they wind up getting cooked. So the other thing, so continuing to address staff and staff meetings, some people may not want to vocalize their concerns in front of the group. So what a couple of people suggested was having a comment box, a locked box in the break room that they could write out their concerns and throw it in the box, and that then they would be addressed either through the staff newsletter or during meetings so that the person could speak up without singling themselves out. And then things should be discussed, and then ideas brought forward by the staff, and then either reframe or revamp things as needed. Again, like I wanted a picture of my daughter by herself, I settled for a picture of all three of my kids together. That wasn't my plan, but it worked. So that's kind of the end of things as far as those are some strategies, there's some ideas. But most of us in lactation know the first step is you've got to really listen to the person's concerns, and then you can and empathize back, reflect back to them, and then we can start a long change. But most people, whenever they have a challenge in their life, they say, yeah, I was doing this, and then things got really hard for a while, and then it all worked out. But most people kind of glaze over that it got really hard for a while. So when we talk to some people that are now designated baby-friendly, they're like, oh, yeah, it was tough there for a while. I wasn't sure it was going to happen. But they got there. So that's where, if what you're doing is not working, then revamp it. So you guys need to be flexible as well in how you approach things. That's all I have to say. So, does anybody have any questions?
No questions.
No questions?
I can make a comment, Ingrid. I know the whole piece about really trying to listen and find out what concerns they may have, and sometimes people don't want to offer at first, but just kind of keep, persistently, I know I really want to hear, and I was doing a skills training for some nurses one time, and then talking about doing the labs in the room, and what would be some barriers for y'all, what would make that hard to do, and some of it was we don't have enough room, our rooms are kind of tiny and crowded, or I don't have good lighting, or some of those just logistical. And then finally one nurse finally felt she could speak up, and she said, I'm just really nervous having to try to do the heel stick in front of the parents, because what if I mess up? What if I can't get any blood? And, and I said, oh my gosh, that's like performance anxiety. My parents were musicians, my daughter's a musician, and to be nervous when you have to perform in front of people, that's something that's hard to overcome. Absolutely. Some people never do overcome that. But being able to reflect back that I could understand why you'd be nervous about that. And then we could talk about how she might take baby steps towards overcoming that anxiety. So I thought that was a new one for me when she said that. I had never thought about that. So.
Well, thank you.
Anyway, other comments or anything? How's everybody feel they're doing with their staff support? Do you feel like you're still getting? Does anybody feel like they've still got some staff resistance to a particular step or concerns? He's multitasking today. No other comments? Well, y'all may think of something. I'll give you some time to ponder that question, and I can just do some quick announcements, some different couple of things that are coming up to make sure y'all are aware of. WIC is sponsoring a 2-day lactation cram course, so that's particularly good for anyone who's taking the exam for IBCLC certification, and that's, I don't have the location, it's in Oklahoma City, and you can, we have information on our website about it. but it's September 8th and 9th, and that would be free. They actually have had over 70 people sign up for that, and so they've moved it, I know, to a larger location, which I'm blanking on right now. And then just FYI, the OPQIC, the Oklahoma Perinatal Quality Improvement Collaborative, is having their annual summit on September 16th, so hopefully y'all have all gotten information about that and are sending some people. That's at the Moore Norman Technology Center on the south side of Oklahoma City. And then lastly, our September webinar should be also a really good one. We have a guest speaker, and that's Kathy Carruthers. She's former chair of the U.S. Breastfeeding Committee and former president of the International Lactation Consultant Association. I've served on boards with her before, but she's done a lot of work nationwide with training. She was involved in development of the Loving Support program that WIC uses for training their peer counselors, so she's very good at talking about the communication challenges that we can encounter in working with breastfeeding, whether it's, interdisciplinary communication or, from a healthcare provider to moms and families. So that's our BBFOK September webinar. And then lastly, I was just at the WIC Task Force meeting yesterday, just to kind of nothing that's happening, in the next few months, but we currently do not have breastfeeding peer counselors through the WIC program available in the Oklahoma City or Oklahoma County. We have them on some of our, outlying counties in the metro area, but they have actually put out a bid, and they've had 4 different organizations or locations put in proposals, so there was definitely a lot of interest in that. So hopefully maybe in the next year or so we'll start to see some peer counselors becoming available, which it would be very helpful to the hospitals in this area. And they are also looking at, as Amanda Morgan mentioned on the webinar we did earlier this year on peer counselors, they're getting closer to kind of developing their plan for putting peer counselors or working out arrangements with birthing hospitals to have their peer counselors actually see some of the moms in the hospital. So this would be somebody that WIC has trained, has been a breastfeeding mom, has already met with the mom prenatally and done some education, built a relationship with her, and then could come and see some of those moms after they deliver as well, not to take the place of what nursing staff is doing or lactation consultant care in the hospital, but to kind of continue to build that continuity of care piece and then continue to follow the mother after hospital discharge. So they'll certainly be looking at hospitals that are interested in maybe kind of piloting that with them as they get some of the ground rules worked out. But U.S. Department of Agriculture is the federal agency that oversees the WIC program nationwide, and that's actually a mandate from them that all the WIC programs look at starting to try to integrate the peer counselors into the hospital setting to improve that continuity piece. So anyway, any other comments or announcements or questions from anyone?
Becky, this is Jill at Canadian Valley. I had 2 quick questions for you. One of them is, and I think this has been discussed before, but it just popped up again for us. Can a hospital gift shop, are they allowed to have pacifiers or bottles in there to sell?
Well, technically they are, though, as Ingrid gave the example, I would strongly discourage it because, then parents just are going to go down, or well-intentioned family members are going to go down and buy baby gifts and come back up with maybe even things that the parents weren't, planning to utilize. But it's not to say they can't still go to Walmart or Target and buy pacifiers, but if, your hospital is really trying to, implement baby-friendly and encourage best practice, then I would not have pacifiers in the gift shop or baby bottles.
I thought I could be wrong here, but I thought it was if they also provided pediatric care. But if you're just a delivering hospital,
you shouldn't have
then you shouldn't have a need for those things.
Right.
Okay.
someplace like Integris or OU that does deliveries but also has a pediatric unit, that'd be appropriate in their gift shop. But somebody like Lakeside, where all they do is deliver babies, not.
But really, yeah, even OU eliminated that before they had their assessment. So.
Right.
And the second question was, is the training that was discussed last time available yet online, the one for staff education?
It is. It's if you all are interested in, we're still working on developing a preview video. If you all are interested in that, I could walk you through that privately. Like we could share, we could set up a conference call or whatever to walk you through it. But we're working on making a YouTube video so that anybody could go and kind of browse and see what it looks like.
Can they sign somebody up right now?
Yeah, they could.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You need to send that link out, or do you want to wait?
We can send it out. Is it, Kyra, is that on Marketplace to sign up for that?
For the training, the online curriculum.
Okay. You could email us if you want to sign some people up, and we'll have to develop a link to where you could sign up through our website.
So almost ready.
Almost ready.
Almost ready.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, well, I think
We'll let everybody go.
Yeah, we'll let everybody go a few minutes early if nobody else has any questions or comments. If you guys think of anything later, feel free to call or email us.
Thank you.